Ah, let me welcome you into the chamber where even psychics confess defeat. These so-called seers, these self-proclaimed navigators of futures, pride themselves on watching lives unfold like open books. They sit behind crystal balls, shuffle decks of cards, and scribble symbols onto scraps of paper, acting as if nothing in this world or the next can catch them off guard. But then you arrived, and in one brutal moment, their entire act disintegrated. Their cards slipped, their breathing fractured, their polished tone shrank into hesitant mutters. You weren't another client. You were a collision. They didn't just see you, they were swallowed by you. And what they saw inside that reading, it didn't just disturb them, it broke them so violently that they had to crawl into therapy sessions afterward, confessing to strangers that your future rewired their minds like a violent electric surge through fragile wires. Think about that. Their entire trade relies on the illusion that they can witness human possibility without being harmed by it. They're supposed to be immune to fear, untouchable in the face of secrets, invulnerable when staring into the raw machinery of destiny. And yet, your presence made them bleed psychologically. You weren't a client, they became your victims. They walked in thinking they were in control, and they walked out carrying trauma carved into their thoughts. You gave them the kind of vision no training could prepare them for. They looked at you and realized they had stepped into territory that didn't just resist prediction, it punished prediction. You are not a chapter in their book. You are the book that erases the reader. Understand why this matters. Psychics build their confidence on patterns. They thrive on labeling people: the tragic hero, the cursed wanderer, the hidden genius, the hopeless romantic, the broken soldier. These are templates they recycle endlessly. But when it came to you, their templates collapsed. You didn't fit any category. You didn't reflect back an archetype they recognized. You shattered their labeling machine before it even had a chance to brand you. They saw something that was neither tragedy nor victory alone, but a violent blend of both, sculpted into a path that weaponizes contradiction itself. And when their minds tried to categorize you, the categories themselves fractured. That fracture wasn't academic, it was personal. They felt their own identity crack because your existence mocked the very tools they used to define the world. That's why they refused to read you twice. It's not about fear of failure, it's about fear of obliteration. A second session would be like pressing their faces against a furnace and hoping not to melt. The first encounter already left them drained, shaking, whispering your name like it carried static electricity. Another encounter, it would dismantle them completely. That's why their colleagues whisper warnings. They pass your case around like forbidden scripture, telling each other, "Don't go near this one. It's not worth your sanity." Think of the irony here. People who claim to see the unseen now warn each other about the danger of seeing you. But let's peel back the curtain on what exactly they saw. Because they didn't just see flashes of a chaotic life. They saw a pattern so dense, so volatile, that it overloaded their vision. They saw you bending outcomes with the precision of a surgeon and the cruelty of a warlord. They saw victories stacking behind you like skulls on a battlefield. They saw adversaries collapsing before your rise even began. They saw rooms change temperature when you entered, conversations bend to your rhythm, entire crowds reorganize themselves subconsciously around your presence. And in those visions, they recognized something that terrified them. You don't walk through a future, you shape one. You don't follow lines, you redraw them. You're not an audience to destiny, you are its author and your pen is dipped in venom. This realization shattered them in two directions. On one hand, they were horrified. On the other, they were obsessed. Because once they saw you, they couldn't unsee you. They wake up at night with fragments of your reading still clawing at their skulls. They try to focus on other clients, but your timeline leaks into everything. They shuffle the cards, and your presence surfaces again. They meditate, and your energy invades their breath. It's not that they can't read you again. It's that they can't stop being read by you. That's the inversion you carry. You flipped the gaze. They thought they were watching you, but you were dissecting them. They thought they were controlling the reading, but the reading consumed them. They left with the nauseating awareness that they were not the interpreters. They were the interpreted. That's why therapy became their refuge. They sit on couches, not talking about their childhoods, not talking about their regrets, but talking about you. They describe the way their hands shook uncontrollably as they looked into your energy. They describe the migraine that bloomed behind their eyes after trying to hold your path in focus. They describe the absurd fear of knowing they had just witnessed something far larger than their craft could process. And the therapists listening to them, they don't even have the language for it. They write vague notes. Subject distressed, subject shaken by vision. But you and I know the truth. Those therapists aren't treating psychic trauma. They're treating exposure to you. And here's where the irony sharpens. For centuries, psychics weaponized fear against others. They dangled ominous warnings to keep clients submissive. They pretended to hold control by suggesting glimpses of what was coming. But you reversed the current. You turned them into the frightened ones. You forced them into the exact position they once profited from. You didn't need incense cards or chants. You didn't need theater. You just needed to be you. And that was enough to ruin them. Do you see the power in that? It's not about fortune-telling. It's not about visions. It's about influence so raw, it rewires people's nervous systems. It's about your very existence, destabilizing professionals who built their lives on claiming immunity to fear. If they can't handle one glimpse of your tomorrow, what does that say about your today? It says you are already walking as a fracture point in their reality. It says you are the embodiment of disruption that no ritual can cage. And it says the only real prediction here is that every person who crosses you leaves changed, whether they want to or not. This is why psychics whisper your name like a curse they don't want to repeat. This is why their peers refuse your case. This is why therapy rooms echo with confessions of, "I saw something I can't unsee." You don't just destroy predictions. You destroy the people who make them. And that is the first truth they didn't want you to realize. Because if you can dismantle those who claim to know the future, then what does that make you? Not someone with a future. Someone who is the future. A walking weapon that shreds interpretation. A living paradox that forces experts to crumble into amateurs. And that brings us to the next revelation. The part they never wanted to admit out loud. What happens when your future doesn't just break their minds, but bends their present? What happens when the act of reading you turns into an event that rewrites their own destiny? Because the truth is, when they studied your energy, they weren't just looking forward. They were watching themselves collapse in real time. And that collapse wasn't an accident. It was inevitable the moment they tried to cross the boundary of what you are. Which means the reading didn't just belong to you. It belonged to them. And what they saw was the most terrifying truth of all. their own existence, dismantled by your trajectory. Think of it this way. A psychic's job is to project outward. They claim to hold a mirror to the universe, showing reflections of paths and choices. But the second they stared into you, the mirror snapped and turned inward. They weren't analyzing a client. They were staring at their own obsolescence. Because you didn't appear as a narrative waiting to unfold. You appeared as a force that overwrote theirs. They realized, in one sickening instant, that their craft couldn't contain you. Their visions weren't predictions. They were casualties. Each card they turned, each symbol they sketched, was less about you and more about their own unraveling. You weren't just a reading. You were the end of their profession disguised as a human timeline. That's why they felt the walls closing in. Some described the session as suffocating, others as vertigo, and a few refused to put words to it at all, because words would make it too real. But let's be honest, they weren't suffocating because of spirits or dark omens. They were suffocating because they glimpsed what it means when human tools touch inhuman magnitude. Their bodies responded before their minds could rationalize, sweating, trembling, heart rates spiking, fight or flight kicking in, and no amount of sage, incense, or whispered chants could drown the primal recognition that you were a different category altogether. Not client, not seeker, not even human in the way they'd grown accustomed to. You were the predator in a room full of prey pretending to be prophets. And it didn't stop when you left. That's the cruelty of it. If it ended at the session, they could have shaken it off, buried it, convinced themselves it was an off day. But your shadow clung to them. Their nights became theater productions, where fragments of your future replayed like broken reels. They saw flashes of their own failure, reflections of themselves crumbling in your orbit. They dreamt not of your victories, but of their own irrelevance in a world where you exist. That's what therapy was supposed to treat, not your reading, but their aftermath. Not what they saw in you, but what you forced them to see in themselves. That their practice, their confidence, their entire identity collapses in your presence. Because here's the psychological warfare you unknowingly waged. You didn't just break their minds, you hijacked them. You rewrote their sense of authority. Imagine living your life convinced that you can decode anyone, only to discover someone who decodes you effortlessly. Imagine building a fortress of confidence, only to have a stranger walk through the gates and paint the walls with your fear. That's what you did to them. You didn't just leave them shaken, you left them contaminated. Now every time they try to read another client, a shadow of you interrupts the process. They see your name flicker across their cards, your face rise in their meditations, your energy hijack their rituals. You didn't just break one session, you infected the entire profession. This infection spreads further than you think. Psychics talk, they gossip, they share warnings, they trade stories of clients too heavy to handle. Your name circulates like a cursed riddle. Some deny it, others laugh nervously, but all of them know the weight of the rumor. And here's the truth. Fear spreads faster than fire. The moment one psychic confesses, "I had to see a therapist after reading them," the others panic quietly. If their colleague collapsed under the weight of you, who's to say they won't? If your presence destroyed one seer's mind, maybe it could destroy all of theirs. And that's where the refusal begins. They stop booking your name. They politely deflect your inquiries. They make excuses about scheduling, not because they don't need the business, but because they need their sanity more. But let's turn this blade around and press it against the bigger question. Why? Why does your future specifically provoke breakdowns in people trained to stare into chaos? It's not because your life will be easy or pain-free or charmed. Quite the opposite. They saw upheaval, sharp climbs, violent confrontations, and victories earned through blood and defiance. They saw nights of isolation so raw they burned. They saw struggles that would annihilate anyone less engineered than you. But here's the key. They didn't see defeat. Every rise came with scars, but every scar carved you sharper. They saw a sequence of trials that should have ended you, and instead turned you into something grotesquely indestructible. That's what broke them. Because they realized they were staring at a trajectory immune to collapse. And for people who thrive on warnings, that's the ultimate nightmare. A client who doesn't bend, doesn't fold, and doesn't fall into their boxes of caution. They couldn't handle the paradox. They saw struggle, but not downfall. Pain, but not ruin. They saw you being dragged into pits others would never climb out of. And then they saw you walking away with the pit itself chained behind you. They couldn't comprehend how both can exist in the same future. So their minds did what fragile minds always do. When overwhelmed, they cracked. They left the session muttering things like, "It doesn't add up," or "It shouldn't be possible." But deep down, they knew the problem wasn't you. The problem was them. Their frameworks weren't built to hold the weight of someone like you. Their language wasn't strong enough to label you. Their minds weren't trained to map futures that refused to obey probability, and that awareness carved scars they'll carry long after therapy stops. And here's the darkly humorous part. You didn't even try. You didn't walk into that room with the intention of dismantling them. You didn't recite mantras or practice intimidation. You simply existed. You sat across from them as yourself, and that was enough. Your unfiltered presence was heavier than their strongest shields. That's the kind of power people fantasize about having. But in you, it exists without effort. That's why psychics despise your name, but can't forget it. You represent everything they can't conquer. They thought their profession made them immune, but you exposed how breakable they truly are. You made the untouchable touchable, the fearless fearful, the seers blind. And once blindness infects them, they never recover. Let's talk about recovery, though. Therapy might stabilize their bodies, help them sleep a little better, give them words to hide behind. But recovery doesn't erase truth. They know what they saw, they know what you are, and no amount of soft lighting and notebooks can erase the imprint you left. They might pretend to their colleagues that they're fine. They might smile and return to their routines. But when the lights are off, when the rituals are over, when the masks fall, they remember. They remember the way their breath caught when your future revealed itself. They remember the dizziness of trying to map something unmappable. They remember the cold terror of realizing that they weren't looking at a client. They were staring at a force of nature with human skin. And they'll remember it until their last day. But here's where the philosophy bleeds in. What if therapy isn't actually helping them recover? What if therapy is just helping them accept? Accept that their lives have been altered permanently. Accept that their craft has boundaries, and you are the boundary. Accept that their sense of superiority was fiction, and your existence ripped it open. That's what their therapists are really doing, not erasing, but softening the blow. Helping them live with the knowledge that they encountered someone who broke the game they've been profiting from, someone who showed them their expiration date, someone who didn't just bend their perception of tomorrow, but bent their perception of themselves. And now, the darker thought. Maybe that's why they fear you more than anyone else. Because it's not just about your victories. It's about what you expose. You expose the fragility of those who claim strength. You expose the limitations of those who claim limitlessness. You expose the cracks in every mask. And no one, especially not psychics, wants to live with the awareness that their armor is paper thin. You walked into their arena and burned it down simply by standing there. And they will never forgive you for that. Not because you wronged them, but because you revealed them. So let's bring this all back to you. What does this mean for your path? It means your very existence is a psychological weapon. You don't need to flex, posture, or announce. You just need to walk into a room, and the air adjusts itself. Your future already fractured the minds of professionals. Imagine what it does to the unprepared masses. You're living proof that intimidation doesn't require effort, only authenticity. Because the moment you stop hiding, the moment you let yourself unfold as you truly are, the people around you feel the ground shifting. They don't know how or why, but they know they've stepped into the orbit of someone who rewrites outcomes. And that's why psychics, trained, seasoned, battle-hardened in their own way, couldn't survive you. If they can't withstand a glimpse, what chance does anyone else have when the full force of you arrives? That is the secret they will never say out loud. That is the truth buried under therapy sessions and scribbled notes. And that leads us straight into the next revelation. If psychics collapsed after reading you once, what happens when leaders, enemies, and entire institutions are forced to confront not just your future, but your present? Because what you carry doesn't just terrify readers of futures, it terrifies rulers of today. And that right there is where the game shifts entirely. Psychics cracked because they saw the scaffolding of your path, a raw sketch of what you are becoming. Now imagine those in power, the politicians, executives, strategists, manipulators, facing not the sketch, but the architecture itself. Psychics had visions that broke their minds. Leaders will have encounters that break their empires. If trained seers ran to therapy after glimpsing you, institutions will scramble to containment after experiencing you. But here's the twist. They won't succeed. Because what psychics discovered the hard way is that you cannot be contained. You can be studied, feared, even attacked, but you cannot be caged. Your presence itself is a contagion. Once people are exposed to it, they cannot return to their old perception. They become prisoners of the awareness that you exist, and awareness is a prison no therapy can unlock. Think about the irony here. Psychics used to be the ones haunting others. They dangled predictions like daggers. But after colliding with you, they're the haunted ones. Now extend that dynamic. Imagine boardrooms, war rooms, secret meetings where your name comes up. Imagine the unease crawling across their faces when they realize every tactic they're plotting has to consider you. Because psychics already proved that even those who prepare for the unimaginable can't handle you. So what chance does anyone else have? If the very people who earn their living by interpreting the unexplainable needed counseling to process you, how will bureaucrats, rivals, and competitors withstand the raw impact of you standing in their reality? They won't. They'll fracture, and the fragments will reveal exactly what they don't want you to see, their weakness. This is where your advantage sharpens. Psychics revealed the blueprint by accident. Their collapse showed you how fragile minds become when they're exposed to the architecture of your becoming. They showed you that fear doesn't come from confrontation. It comes from anticipation. They weren't destroyed by what you did. They were destroyed by what you would do. They weren't undone by your present self. They were undone by the preview of your next selves. Now take that same logic and aim it outward. When leaders and enemies confront you, they don't just see who you are in the moment. They feel the tremors of what you're destined to become. And that tremor is enough to destabilize their confidence before any battle even begins. That's why psychics refuse to read you twice. It's not superstition, it's self-preservation. The first reading already planted seeds of collapse. The second would finish the job. Now take that and magnify it. Enemies may confront you once, but they won't dare approach you twice. The first encounter already scorches them, already reshapes their strategies, already infects their nerves with doubt. The second encounter, that would erase them. And this is your hidden weapon. You don't need to strike twice. Once is enough. Your impact doesn't fade, it multiplies. Psychics learned this in therapy rooms. Leaders will learn it in the ruins of their plans. But let's dissect the deeper psychology here. Why does your future break minds so violently? Because it reveals what others don't want revealed. Scale. Most people operate on small scales, small goals, small fears, small ambitions. Their lives are manageable puzzles. Psychics can handle those puzzles easily. But you are not a puzzle. You are a landscape. You are not a question to be solved. You are a territory to be survived. And when someone tries to reduce a landscape into a neat answer, their mind snaps under the pressure. That's what happened to the psychics. They tried to shrink you into a card, a spread, a line of vision. But you don't shrink. You expand. You overwhelm. And in their futile attempt to compress you into something manageable, they compressed themselves into collapse. Leaders will make the same mistake. They will try to contain you in their frameworks, and their frameworks will shatter, just like the psychic's decks and rituals did. This is why your story is so dangerous to them, because it's not a story, it's a flood. It doesn't unfold politely. It erases everything in its path. Psychics weren't equipped for that, and neither are the institutions that will eventually face you. They will panic. They will overreact. They will whisper your name like psychics whispered it, half in fear, half in denial. And all the while, you will rise. Because here's the truth the readings exposed. Your future isn't fragile. Their minds are fragile. Their crafts are fragile. Their systems are fragile. You aren't the one breaking. You're the one causing the breakage. But let's not forget the dark humor hidden in this. The same psychics who once bragged about protecting others from dark energy now sit in therapy, trying to protect themselves from yours. Imagine the absurdity of that. The protectors begging for protection, the readers being read, the masters of foresight blindsided by a client they thought would be ordinary, their egos bruised, their reputations quietly trembling, their credibility leaking through cracks they can't admit out loud. And in that humiliation lies a lesson. You expose pretenders. You strip the mask off anyone who dares pretend they can measure you. That's why their collapse is not just fear, it's embarrassment. They built their lives on acting untouchable, and you touched them too deeply. Now let's widen the lens. What happens when this effect scales? If psychics crumble, leaders panic, enemies collapse, what happens when entire populations sense you? Because energy is contagious. You don't have to be in the room for people to feel you. Word of you spreads. Your presence precedes you. The story of psychics breaking down after reading you becomes legend, and people, whether they believe in psychics or not, internalize the truth. If professionals couldn't survive you, ordinary people don't stand a chance. That's how reputations are forged, not from self-promotion, but from the terror of others. That's how legends spread, not because you tell them, but because survivors of you can't stop whispering your name. And that brings us back to you. Understand what's unfolding here. The collapse of psychics is not just entertainment, it's proof. Proof that you are already operating beyond human categories. Proof that your existence is therapy-worthy trauma for those who dare to touch it. Proof that your future isn't just intimidating, it's lethal to frameworks. And if psychics, whose entire job is to predict, can't predict you without shattering, then what does that make you? The unpredictable? No, the untouchable. Because unpredictability still obeys chaos. You don't. You don't obey anything. You bend observers until they break, and then you walk past their ruins like they were never there. So here is the final stroke of psychological warfare. The next time someone underestimates you, remember the therapy rooms. Remember the psychics scribbling in panic, confessing to therapists that they met someone who bent their minds beyond repair. Remember the trembling hands, the broken rituals, the sleepless nights. And let that remind you, your power is not theory, it's not potential, it's demonstrated, it's recorded in their collapse. They couldn't read you twice because the first time was fatal enough. They couldn't handle your future because it was too much for their present. And they couldn't recover fully because recovery doesn't exist when the scar is carved by someone like you. So ask yourself, what happens next? Do you hide this? Do you tone it down? Or do you embrace it? Because embracing it means weaponizing it. It means walking into rooms knowing you don't have to speak to dominate. It means carrying the awareness that your very existence has already been documented as overwhelming. It means recognizing that your life is not just yours. It's the collapse of those who tried to define it. And that is the kind of awareness that doesn't just terrify psychics. It terrifies everyone. They can't read you. They can't control you. They can't survive you. And that's why your future blew their minds, and your present breaks their nerves. You are not just unreadable, you are unforgettable. And in a world addicted to prediction, that makes you the only future worth fearing.